Formicola. Joe Wade Formicola. Joe Wade Formicola on News Radio 680 WPTF and WPTF.com.
Welcome to it. Good to have you on a Saturday afternoon. Beautiful day today. And I'll tell you, man, sometimes it's tough to come in, when it's so nice out. Okay, we're going to reach over and turn your volume up. This is going to be kind of a, I'm going to put it to you this way, a heady conversation. It's about religion, but we're going to take a look at it. Let me introduce you our guests. First of all, the three most popular religions in the world are Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. All three are based on the same principles, even share many of the fundamental similarities, all being based on the God of the Hebrew patriarch Abraham. Each religion, despite its similarity, and other two claims to be absolute, the claims give strong moral compasses to those who believe in it. But are these claims justified? Here's our guest is... he's writing about the Old Testament. Is Ian W. Burchell, his new book, The Ethics of Faith, Right, Wrong, and the God of Abraham. Welcome to the show. Good to have you on with us.
Thank you very much.
This is a little bit controversial now. You understand that, right? I mean, you're a Catholic, so am I. Am I going to get in trouble with the Pope by having you on?
Well, I'm not a Catholic. I was raised as such, but I haven't called myself one for a very long time.
Oh, that's it. I'm calling the Pope on you. I'm getting a hold of the Cardinal, man. I'm telling you, you're in trouble now. I'll tell you, you're in trouble now. You gotta have a little fun here now, too, Burchell. Don't take everything so seriously. Mm-hmm. I do kind of a fun show, too. I did send your stuff to a couple of people that I know that are a lot smarter than me. Dr. Byron Curtis, professor of biblical studies at Geneva College. He's not familiar with your book, although he says the Kirkus Review does a pretty good job, and they say it's a skeptical investigation of ethics portrayed in the Old Testament. Okay, other than that, why'd you decide to write this book? And let's kind of break this down into cliff notes, because we're not all as smart as you, Mr. Burchell. Some of us just went to community college. So let's break it down a little bit. Go ahead.
Well, really, what as Dr. Curtis mentioned in the review, it's a skeptical investigation of the ethics of the old faith, the Old Testament, and faith in the primary character there, and that is Yahweh or God or Allah, whichever we choose to give this particular God.
This is really interesting because we're basically, and you tell me if you agree or disagree, I mean, we're basically a Judeo-Christian society, correct?
No, I would kind of disagree with that. I would say that we have a lot of influences from the Judeo-Christian tradition in our society, and that is in terms of the architecture and the music and
the Ten Commandments. I mean, basically the Ten Commandments too, right?
Well, the Ten Commandments, of course, were according to the story given directly from Yahweh to Moses on Mount Sinai, and there is there are a lot of people who claim, well, this is the basis or the foundation of our moral compass or our moral code. And I think that's a highly questionable claim.
Well, let's ask you some of these questions. This is a tough, and this is a conversation you got to know a little bit about now. This is not going to be an easy conversation to follow along, but the character of God in Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. How would you break that down for us?
Well, what I have not done is I haven't broken it down amongst those three, not in this first book, because what I've done here is taken the commonality that these three monotheistic faiths have, and that is the God of Abraham. All three are branches of that original Hebrew tribal faith.
All right, but that's because Abraham's son from the maidservant God sent out, and that's Ishmael, right?
Yes, Isaac and Ishmael, yes. But,
we got a problem. I mean, most of the Christians and the Jews, I mean, why are the Muslims, they don't consider us, they got their own thing going on, and, they just, they're not, reaching out to us.
Well, I don't know that anyone is reaching out to anyone in any meaningful way, and I think the reason why that is that in order to do so, you would actually have to violate the fundamental principles that you believe your God holds you to. So if you happen to be a very Orthodox, faithful Jew, for example, there's no possibility that you can have put any credibility to the claim that Jesus of Nazareth was a Messiah. Just as if you are a very faithful, if you're a faithful Catholic or evangelical Christian, you do not believe, as do the Muslims, that the final and ultimate prophet of the Lord God was Muhammad. That you do believe that Jesus Christ was not just a prophet, but in fact the Son of God and one in being with God. So these are very fundamental differences amongst the three different sects that if you hold this faith very strongly, it's impossible to reach out in any meaningful way.
And that's why we got all the problems in the world, Mr. Burchell.
Well, that's a source of many problems.
It's a source of pretty much a lot of them. Now, feel free to join the conversation. Ask Mr. Burchell any questions you like. 919-860-9783. 919-860-9783. What were you really, I'm trying to figure out, what are you looking for in this book? What were you trying to tell us?
Well, I was trying to pose a question, and through the course of reading and writing the book, I came up with a fundamental answer to the question. But the question is this: is this God, which is the commonality amongst arguably about half the religious believers in the world, when we put the monotheistic faiths together, is this God a legitimate source for ethical principles, ethical teaching, moral guidance? That is something that is claimed by adherents of not just Judaism and Christianity and Islam, but even by people who claim that they're not adherents of any particular religion, but they say, well, we need to have some sort of source of morality, and religion is probably the best source we can think of. So I look at the foundation of the monotheistic faith, and I look at the character of Yahweh. I look at his direct actions, and I look at his commandments, the things that he insists be done. I look at the people that he gives us as heroes and people to emulate, his priests and his prophets and so forth, and just evaluate what they do in terms of, could we say this was a good action or a bad action? Was it right? Was it wrong? Did it cause pain? Did it relieve pain? Did it cause comfort or distress? And by and large, the answer is almost all the time that it caused distress, not comfort, that it caused pain, not relieve pain.
Well, this is a very forgiving God. If you read the Bible, a priest told me this a long time ago. He's a grown-up Catholic and a Christian, still attend church now. I do go to a non-denominational church, and I attend Catholic church as well. It's a very forgiving God. I'm going to try to analyze what you just said. I'm sure that's opened up a lot of people to question it. Let's. Will, are you there? We got a caller here. Will, the reason I'm asking you to jump on, are you there, Will?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, just I want you to hold on a second, and you're going to get a shot at a question from Mr. Burchell coming up here. Our guest is Ian Burchell. It's an interesting book, and it's about, the book is called The Ethics of Faith, Right, Wrong, and the God of Abraham. And we'll be back with our guest, and Will's got the first question up, and you can join the conversation as well. 919-860-9783. 919-860-WPTF.
Tonight, right.
News Radio 680, WPTF, WPTF.com. Ian W. Burchell is our guest. The book, Ethics of Faith, Right, Wrong, and the God of Abraham. Will, you're on? Welcome to the conversation. Good to have you on. Go ahead, Will.
Yes. First off, I think I'm denying his first principle of equating Allah with Jehovah God. First off, Allah is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, as it says in the Bible. Allah is the God of, supposedly, Abraham and Ishmael. So how does he get to where equating Allah with the God of the Hebrews, the Israelites, and God of Christians?
Let me break this down. You're saying that Allah is the God of Ishmael and not Isaac. Is that pretty much breaking it down?
Yes, I think the Muslims came out of Ishmael. Isn't that correct?
That's correct, yeah. Go ahead, Ian, Mr. Burchell, go ahead.
Well, it's not I that claim that this is the same God. This is, in fact, a claim of Jews, Christians, and Muslims, except you very well maybe find a very tiny minority somewhere on the fringes and say, no, this is a different God altogether. It is part of the Muslim tradition, by some, held by some at least, that the people who eventually became the Muslims somehow trace their descent to Ishmael, who is, of course, would have been the follower of the same God. Allah is used, even when we speak in English, to refer to the God to whom the Muslims pray. Allah is very simply the Arabic word for God. We maybe cause confusion by not simply translating it into God with a capital G, let's say, that when we're referring to a statement made by a Muslim cleric or something. But it is exactly the same character. The tradition goes all the way back to the same patriarchs. And if you look at not just the Quran, but other commentaries and sayings of the Prophet, the Hebrew patriarchs, all of the same people, the same men, the same guides, the same priests and whatnot that were sent by Yahweh or Jehovah or Allah These are all recognized by the Muslims as well as Jews and Christians, to the exception of Jesus, of course.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, I just got another comment.
Go ahead.
I still disagree with. I don't agree with Allah being Jehovah God. And I'm sure give me a week and I can get back to you on.
No, I understand. This was going to be one of those controversial shows, Will. I totally understand where you're coming from on this.
It's not a problem.
This is not the norm, okay? For most Christians, Mr. Burchell, I mean, I didn't bring him on to beat him up or anything like that. He's got a book out, and it's worth the conversation. I sent his stuff to a couple of ministers and some smart guys, and they basically said it should be for an interesting show. And I think that's all Mr. Burchell is... he's just he did some research, and we're here to discuss it. Will, I understand. What Will is saying is, and I kind of agree with him a little bit, and I'm not that smart, Mr. Burchell, but I mean, Isaac, he can't be, the Ishmael thing in Isaac, I mean, that's, I don't know why God came up with that one anyway, but, man, I'm going to send you out there, but you're not where I'm building I'm with Isaac here. I mean, how do you relate to that in the Bible?
Well, there's not very much about Ishmael in the Bible itself, in the Old Testament. He is the son of
the maidservant and supposedly the ancestor of Muhammad. Well, Muhammad's an ancestor from Ishmael.
That's right. Well, this, of course, was something that was more or less made up out of whole cloth many, many, many centuries later. There's nothing about that in the Old Testament. He's there as a son. He's actually sent off with his mother, the maidservant, into the desert when he's just maybe a 12-year-old boy,
right.
Because he loses favor with Sarah. This is, of course, after they give birth to Isaac. But there is absolutely no suggestion whatsoever, but not even the most moderate suggestion that Ishmael therefore adopted a different God. In fact, later on in Genesis, he does come and reconcile with his brother and revere his father and help bury them and his parents bury them later on in the Genesis. There's absolutely no suggestion at all that Ishmael chose a different God or that a different God...
Yeah, but God say, I mean, and help me out with this, didn't he say, I'm going to send you out and you will have a nation, but I'm not building my world on your nation. I'm sticking with...
That's right.
Okay.
Right, the promise won't come out of Ishmael.
Yeah, it'll come out of Isaac, right.
That's correct.
Yeah.
That's right.
All right, so we're agreeing with that.
He was not going to be the chosen son. He was not going to be the one to populate the earth with his family and all that. But there's absolutely no suggestion that he was to choose a new God, a different God, or that he did do such, or that there's no other God comes into play with the story of Ishmael.
That's an interesting point you brought up, Mr. Burchell. And 919-860-9783, if anybody wants to comment on that. That's interesting that you say there's nothing in the Old Testament that says that he gave up on the God of Abraham. 919-860-9783. Well, appreciate your call. It's kind of interesting stuff. A little heavy on a Saturday afternoon, right, Will? But we're going to do it anyway. All right, Ian Burchell is our guest. His book is The Ethics of Faith, Right, Wrong, and the God of Abraham. And he investigates the claims that each of these three religions has to be bettering the lives of its followers, and you're not thinking that does. I mean, I don't know. I think there's a God in heaven. I think that he's doing some good, but you're not seeing that in your investigation or your research.
Well, no. One thing that you mentioned just a little while ago is that this is a very forgiving God. Now, I can certainly understand the perspective of Christians looking at the character of Jesus and saying he is a forgiving character.
Well,
he's a forgiving prophet, Messiah, or God, whatever term you want to use for him.
Right.
What I'm looking at here is the Father of Jesus, whom, of course, Christians believe is not just the Father of Jesus, but in fact the same being. Jesus is one in being with the Father, as they say. Now, if we look at that character of Yahweh or Jehovah or simply God in the Old Testament, the 39 foundational books that we have in that canon, you do find a number of times him declaring himself to be loving and long-suffering and full of justice and kindness and forgiving and so forth. You find almost no examples of this happening, but what you do find is a God who is invariably violent, cruel, judgmental, unpredictable, capricious, jealous, and insists more than anything that you fear and obey him.
Well, that's it. We know that he doesn't expect us to be perfect. He expects us to be his. And he's certainly done some nasty things to a lot of people. There's a movie out right now where he just say, I don't like what's going on. I'm going to flood the whole world. I mean, We see that because you're not obeying. He's given everybody a chance. He put Adam and Eve here. They blew it. They were the first ones to mess up. And then people have been messing up ever since, and all of us have. So, I get that part. I mean, why is that a problem?
Well, if we look at one of the examples that you just threw out there, the example of Adam and Eve, that they were given the opportunity, and as you say, they blew it, and therefore they were the ones who committed the original sin, which...
Right, that's what we're all paying for now, yeah.
So many people have continued to believe that every newborn baby is born with this mark of original sin. But we look at what that original sin was, and that original sin was an offense against God. It was not a crime. It wasn't anything that did any harm to any other person or even an animal in the garden. It was simply disobedience to an order that they were given by their God. And that was, do not eat this fruit from this particular tree. Now, if we look at it a little more closely, the tree from which they were told not to eat the fruit was named by their God as the tree of knowledge of good and evil. Now, we don't have to think too deeply about this. If this is the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and you may not eat from it, you will not gain the knowledge of good and evil. If you do not have knowledge of good and evil, you really are not free to commit an act of evil, or I suppose even an act of good. Any act that you commit is an act that has no conscious good or evil or right or wrong to it. On top of that, we're talking about two innocent creatures, the first man and woman, according to the mythology, who didn't know anything. They didn't know much of anything. They certainly didn't know right from wrong or good from evil. They had no sense of morality except for obey this God. Mm-hmm. And again, in the very narrative, it tells us that God sent their way one afternoon a serpent. And it says there, right there in the text, that he was the most subtle, that is the cleverest creature that God had put in the garden. So there was this creature who was smarter than Adam and Eve, and went over and said, look, why don't we give this piece of fruit a try? So, we can make all kinds of other comparisons or analogies. We can say, would you do this to an innocent child who doesn't know anything, and then you tempt him twice or three times, and then punish him for doing something which there's no way he knew that it was going to be a right or a wrong thing? And then do we scar humanity with that sin? This concept of original sin, I think, is really one of the most horrific doctrines in the monotheistic religions, because it says that we're all to be punished, or we're all to be marked at least for this original sin. And as you
do you believe in God died for your sins, Mr. Burchell?
Well, when you say God died for my sins, then
Jesus, He sent His only Son.
Right. Again, okay, very, very central to the Christian religion, that Jesus came and died.
Yeah, He sent His only Son to come here, and right.
I think that whole doctrine of vicarious sacrifice is really monstrous. To suggest that in order to forgive my sins, someone else has to suffer, and according to what we see in the writing, that it was pretty serious suffering. We're talking about beating, scourging.
Yeah, I mean,
it's very painful, right? So this one person, that again, if you're a Christian, you're supposed to believe that not only was he God, but he was fully man, therefore fully capable of feeling all this pain, was going to undergo all this pain so that my sins would be forgiven. Well, that's pretty horrific. Because
when did you? I want to go back. But you're a pretty smart guy. You got a lot of degrees and all that. You grew up Catholic. When did you change? What was it that you started questioning a whole bunch of stuff here? I grew up Catholic too. I don't have any problem with the Catholic Church. I just, there's a lot of problems in a lot of religions. I just kind of roll with the flow. I mean, we don't, we take certain things for granted, and other things we go, well, we'll just go along with it. You changed somewhere. When did this happen to you?
Well, I don't have a very interesting story on that one, and I know lots of people do. They say, that maybe some people...
you went to Asia. I thought maybe that might have done something to you, where you spent some time in Asia.
Well, a lot of my travels, of course, have built a lot of who I am, because I've met many different people with many different beliefs and cultural remnants of very different ways they look at the world. But really, in terms of moving away from the Roman Catholic Church or Catholicism or Christianity, there's nothing dramatic about it. I just, as I matured, I as St. Paul would have said, I put away childish things. At one point, I no longer believed that there was an old fat man coming down every December 25th and putting clothes under the tree.
Oh, well, all right. I mean, I understand.
I no longer believed in vicarious sacrifice of Jesus Christ.
You spent some time in Saudi Arabia, too. I want to get to that. There's a couple of things I also want to get to, and we'll get to your calls. Join the conversation. Best guest I can have on is you, 919-860-9783. 919-860-9783. I want to talk a little bit, because this movie's so popular. What exactly did Noah do to curry favor with the Lord to avoid the great flood? We'll ask Mr. Burchell his take on that one and a lot of other questions, too. Feel free to join the conversation. News Radio 680 WPTF.
680 W.
News Radio 680 WPTF, WPTF.com. Joe Wade Formicola in New York. Guest Ian W. Burchell. The book, Ethics of Faith, Right, Wrong, and the God of Abraham. You know, it's interesting, what Mr. Burchell is trying to do, if you just joined the conversation, we find the word righteous over 400 times in the books of the Old Testament, but rarely, according to Mr. Burchell, do we find righteous triumph. For example, let's talk about Noah for a second. What exactly did Noah do to curry favor with the Lord and avoid the great flood? I mean, he was that's an interesting question. What did you find in that? Did you find anything in there?
It doesn't tell us. It very simply says that that God had regretted having created man. He was very disappointed with how man had turned out to be, rather sinful and irredeemable and so forth. But that it does say that Noah found favor in the eyes of his Lord, and therefore Noah and his wife and his sons and their wives would be the only ones that would be spared from this flood. When we look at the other side of it, we wonder, okay, now. No, we don't know what Noah did. Let's just assume that he was actually a very good person, and as for his wife and his sons and their wives. What about the rest of humanity? Nobody else on the face of the earth, according to this narrative, had found favor in the sight of the Lord. Therefore, they weren't worthy of saving. And this includes children. This includes women, men, children, infants. It includes people who are disabled. It includes people who must have been. Are
we overthinking this, Mr. Birch? Our brains are little pieces of granules of salt compared to the world and the universe and our God. I mean, just there's certain things we don't understand. Why did young children die now that didn't do anything? I mean, there's no answer for it other than you still have to have faith and believe. And that's that question about Noah. We're just going to have to believe and have faith that God knew what he was doing and said, Noah, you're it. You're my guy. Here we go.
Well, we're not overthinking it. I think we're underthinking it. And the problem that I have with this faith is that we just say, we just accept that this was God's will and God must be right in so doing. We can find, again, not just in the Noah story, but so many other stories with such horrible things happening to people that were innocent people.
You're talking about Joshua killing off a long list of innocent victims in his campaign through Canaan.
That. We can talk about all the various kings in the books of the kings of Judah. Most of them were fairly irredeemable. We can talk about King David. We can talk about the prophet Elisha or the Levite priest or what happened to Job. I mean, there's just story after story about this. Now we do have questions like, why do innocent children die?
Well, we have that now. My niece died of a brain tumor at 15, and she never did anything wrong in her sweetest small. Hey, we're very upset about that. We don't understand it, but we move on. I don't know what God. Maybe one day I'll ask him. I don't know, but we still have to continue to have faith.
Well, see, that's
where you're having the problem here. I mean, folks, help me out here. 919-860-9783. Join the conversation. I guess the question is, you're questioning faith. I mean, I'm not here to, look, I'm just asking questions here, Mr. Burchell. Is that where it is, or is that where we're at right now?
I'm not questioning faith itself, not in this particular book, although, faith is a problematic prospect for me. What I'm questioning is the ethical value of it. In fact, I'd like to point to the ethical dangers of faith, particularly blind faith and unthinking faith, because it can, and not just can, it has and continues to lead us down some very, very...
Well, yeah, those who followed Hitler and all that kind of baloney, yeah, I understand.
Well, those who followed Hitler, but also those who followed the Christian Crusaders. Those, if we want to look at the current war on terror and say, is there a religious element in that? There's no way we can separate the religious element from that on either side. Obviously, on one side, it's a much fiercer.
Yeah, but the crusade those weren't. I don't think that was an edict from God, was it? That was just humans trying to think that they were doing the right thing. And we have a free will. I mean, God gave us the free will, and we screw up sometimes.
The Crusades were edicts from the Pope, or from
well, okay, that's just a guy. I mean, the Pope's not infallible. None of us really believe that. You as a Catholic at one time, I don't believe it. Let's get John on from Cary, because he's infallible. John, I'm just kidding you, John. Welcome to the conversation.
Hey, how you doing?
Well, we're having a tough one. This is deep, man. This is deep, John. We need your help. Go ahead.
Well, let me first say I was also raised Catholic, and one of the big questions I got is if there truly was a Noah's Ark, where is it? How did we lose it?
Well, that's big. We think it's in Turkey. I don't know. I don't know if Mr. Burchell is up on that one. Go ahead and take a stab at it if you want, Mr. Burchell.
Somebody several decades ago found some remnants of something on the top of Mount Ararat, and there was claims that this was Noah's Ark, and of course it's been dated. It's nowhere near as old as it perhaps.
Right, I remember that. Yeah, it was. The wood was not that old, right?
Well, I guess what the reason I'm asking that is, if there truly was a Noah's Ark, would that not have become the ultimate shrine? But yet we've lost it. How do you lose something that's supposedly the size of 3 football fields?
I don't know, but let me ask you this question, because we're going to start to get nitpicking now. Where's this and where's that? Let me ask this question. I mean, the point is do we not believe in the documented evidence that God walked this earth? Jesus walked on this earth. Do we not? Are we all agreed to that or not? Let's go with you, Mr. Burchell. Do we have enough documented evidence that God walked or Jesus walked on this earth?
I no longer believe that.
Wait a minute. Hold on, John. Go ahead, Ian. I'll get to you in a second.
There is no documented evidence that Jesus walked on the earth. All mention of Jesus was written down at least 3 or 4 decades after the period of time when he was supposed to have lived, and we have to consider that this was a place. This was he lived in a province of the Roman Empire, a literate, very well organized administrative empire, which kept meticulous records on all kinds of things. And they were, of course, because they were a widespread empire, they were always very careful about insurrections and revolutions and rebellions and so forth. And if we could think about the stories we're told in the Gospels about what Jesus did in public, and then we find absolutely no contemporary mention of things like this charismatic preacher entering the city of Jerusalem with throngs of people throwing palms.
Maybe the Romans didn't want that to be known. All right, John, you don't believe that Jesus walked this earth? Documented evidence?
No, not at all. As a matter of fact, I actually no longer believe in God at all.
That's it. I'm calling the Pope. Get him on the line. You're done, John. We're excommunicated. I'm going to get power to excommunicate you myself today. Go ahead, John.
Ask yourself this. If there truly is a God, why doesn't he just appear before us maybe once every 500 years? Maybe float down at the Super Bowl?
And John, I mean, not to be facetious about it, I don't know. I don't know that. But you got to, and see, I'm going back to faith, John. I appreciate it. I really do. John, thanks for the call, because I want to get Abe on here. With a name like Abe, we got to have him on, right? Come on, his name is Abraham. Abraham, welcome to the show with Ian Burchell. Good to have you on, Abe.
Good to talk to you, Joe. We haven't called in a while, but I was raised Christian, and obviously my first name comes from, actually, out of the Bible, Abraham, father of many nations. And this is the way I view it. Man is incapable of understanding God. And, you remember the discussion in the Old Testament between Noah and God, or Abraham and God, but he was saying, where were you when I put all this together? Who are you to question me? That's what God's asking.
Well, that way, I said it my own way, Abe, and Mr. Burchell's with us. I said, our brains are just little grains of salt compared to, understanding God. I just don't think what do you think about, hold on, Abe, don't go away, because someone asked Burchell, what do you think of Abe's comments? I kind of understand what he's saying. I kind of agree with Abe. What do you think, Mr. Burchell?
Well, without being too flippant, I can say, we're not possible. We can't possibly understand the mind of Thor or Anubis or Zeus or Apollo or Izanagi. I could just choose it. So we can't understand any of these deities, which are of course all parts of mythologies from around the world, we can't understand the mind of Yahweh either, because he's again a mythological creature. But one of the things that the caller just mentioned is somewhere where he says, who are you to question me? Were you there when I created it? This was in fact from the book of Job, which is sort of a very well-known story. People think they know the story, wherein Job was a good man and Satan asked God, to test his faith, and so he did, and he took away everything, his wealth and his family and so forth. And Job didn't lose his faith, and eventually God rewarded him by restoring, all his wealth and his animals, and gave him new children. There's a lot more to that story, and in fact, it makes very, very clear when you read the text. It says Job was a very upstanding, righteous man. He did well in the community. He was well respected. He would never overlook injustice. But he helped orphans and widows, and he was faithful to his God always. And he prayed and he sacrificed and he made sure his children were raised properly. And then, on a bit of a bet, Satan said to Yahweh, I bet he'll lose his faith if you just take away all these things. So he took away his wealth and his animals, and he killed all his children. And then in the end, and of course, as the reader, we look at this, and we know the reason why this is happening. And Job doesn't lose his devotion to his God. He certainly doesn't lose his fear of his God. And we say, well, that's because of his great faith. But when it's all finished and God appears directly to Job and talks to him, he doesn't say to him, my son, you've done well. You've shown your devotion. He actually scolds him. And Job never gets the explanation that it was just on a whim that God decided to inflict all this torture upon him.
You talk about the books of the Bible. We're talking Old Testament, then there's New Testament. You're saying this is some fantastic fiction? Is that what you're saying, Mr. Burchell? I mean, we just had some new documentation that Jesus was married. I mean, I haven't looked into it much. I'm sure people have heard about that. That came out a couple of days ago. I don't know. It sure seems to me, and I know this was written 500 years later, whenever. I just think there's too much documentation that I believe that Jesus walked this earth. I know we got some areas where we're not sure where he was for a while, but it's just too much for me, and I guess you too, then, Abe, to throw this down the drain.
Yeah, I believe he walked the earth, and I think and I think this is something people need to consider. Death is not always punishment. The Creator has a right to give and take. And he may take a baby, an innocent niece, or innocent person.
And we don't know why. And we don't know why.
Right. But we don't have to know why. We don't know why we are here. So why should we question?
Yeah, what's our purpose half the time? I'm trying to figure that one out myself.
Yeah, and so, but, I had a discussion with a heart surgeon one time. I never forget it. And he was going to operate on me. And he told me how he was going to do it, and they take it out, and they stop it, and they do what they're going to do, and they put it back. And I said, well, what makes it start up? And this guy was very trained, brilliant man, said, we don't know. And there are too many things man still doesn't know in the realm of nature that how can he dare question God when he can't figure it out anyway? Just simple things like, why did the trees grow? What about photosynthesis, et cetera, on and on and on. So whoever put this together, unless it went poof, like they taught me at Harvard, just poof. No, I don't believe in
Is that what you learned at Harvard? Poof?
That's right.
Son of a gun, I could have gotten in if that's all you're going to learn.
Yeah. And so the guys who say no great creator did it, then who did it? And how does it work so well, things that you still can't figure out?
All right, so Abe.
That's my question.
Good to hear from you, Abe. Don't be a stranger now, Judge.
Okay, now.
All right. Ian Burchell is our guest. We're going to get back to him and your calls, 919-860-9783. We're talking about Mr. Burchell's book, which we figured would have some, a lot of controversy, and that's why he's on the show. Ethics of Faith, Right, Wrong, and the God of Abraham. More with you and the callers coming up. News Radio 680 WPTF.
680.
All right, let's do it. News Radio 680 WPTF. Ian W. Burchell, the new book, Ethics of Faith, Right, Wrong, and the God of Abraham. And Margaret, you're on News Radio 680 WPTF with our guest. Go ahead, Margaret.
Hey, how are y'all?
Well, it's getting a little heavy in here, don't you think, Margaret?
Yeah.
It's getting a little deep, isn't it?
Getting a little deep. That's why I had to call.
I know you did. You couldn't hold yourself back. You had to call. You had the phone. Went to your hand. You said, I've got to call the show, didn't you? Is that what happened, Margaret?
Exactly.
There you have it. All right, talk to us.
Well, all you got to do is just go outside and look up in the sky that God made, the moon, the sun, the stars, all the land that when he created earth, he created it so people could make. All
right, let's hold that thought, Margaret. Mr. Burchell, you know where Margaret's going here, and God bless you, Margaret. Thanks for calling. How do you put that into your conversation?
Well, I think this goes along with something that the previous caller, Abe, was talking about, saying, well, we don't understand. We don't understand the universe. We don't understand the world, and we can't understand everything because it's created by God. And so now Margaret, as we look at the moon and the sun and the stars, and there are lots of things we don't understand. There are many, many things we didn't understand in the past. They're mysterious, and this is really where a lot of religious beliefs come from. Religion is, at its origin, it is proto-scientific, it's proto-philosophical. It's our desire to answer questions. It's our desire to understand our world. It's our desire to understand the universe. So we can look in some of the civilizations of the Near East, and we go back thousands of years, and they're trying to understand things like weather patterns. They're trying to understand the different changes in climate throughout the year. They're trying to understand storms. They're trying to understand fate of armies at war. And they look in the sky, and they see regular patterns of stars, and we see that they change, but they change over regular patterns throughout the year, and then they're back again.
What do you make of
imagination that they look like certain things? And from that, we get all kinds of the stories from the Greek and the Persian mythologies. And then we realize, well, no, these aren't quite true, but they gave us some answers at the time. They turned out not to be true. We do this with all kinds of things.
We do. There's a movie coming out about, where the kid dies, and he said, there's a lot of, you hear that every once in a while. Yeah, God. What about these magnificent stories of these angels that appear and help people on? I've talked to a guy that, he was a young guy, and he was on his way to death in a car, and he was only a kid, and all he could remember, there was somebody in the front seat that, swerved the car in another way, and they were saved. What do you make of stuff like that?
Well, he had an extraordinary experience with what we might call a near-death experience in a car accident, and the brain can do all kinds of things. But we can just put it even very simply: we can dream of all kinds of magical things that we know when we wake up that they didn't really happen. But what if you have a dream, and when you wake up, you're quite convinced that in fact was Jehovah speaking to you in that dream, or Jesus, or some other creature that tells you this is the direction in which you have to take your life?
I'm going to get these callers in because we're running out of time. Usually what happens in conversations like this, Mr. Burchell, that we start off, and then when I get towards the end, I start getting jammed. Susan Morrisville, thanks for waiting, Susan. You're on with Ian Burchell. Go ahead, Susan. You're on WPTF.
Yeah, I have a couple of comments, and also you brought up something that I was going to weave into this conversation. I certainly believe in God, and I believe in the Lord Jesus Christ. Now, I believe that the people that are written about in the Bible, such as Moses, Abraham, Joshua, and so forth and so on, that these people were chosen specifically by God for specific tasks. And yes, they had free will, but they also loved God, honored Him, and respected Him enough to carry through the tasks that were deemed. I agree with Margaret about creation. And all you have to do is look at a bird or a tree, the Big Bang Theory and all this sort of thing. I believe there was a creator who made all of this.
Now, what is your question? You have a question for Mr. Burchell. What is it?
I have is, how can you possibly explain, my life has been spared at least 4 times. I could have died readily. And on the last occasion near the Outer Banks, how could it be that a woman just happened to walk in dressed in black, who happened to just be a paramedic, with me laying on the floor turning blue?
Well, you're asking the questions that a lot of us ask.
The question is, I told God, I said, Lord, I am not afraid to die, but please do not let my granddaughter see me die this way.
All right, he's going to, and I understand where you're coming from, because I totally agree with you. I think that God intervenes. I think for the power of prayer, He doesn't always. Yes. It's not God isn't Santa Claus. No, you just can't pray and get what you want all the time. All right.
I know.
All right, Susan. Thank you. Let's, Mr. Burchell. We're going to give you the last few minutes here. I'm going to let you, comment and tell us about your book, where it's available, and any comments you want to have. Go ahead. I'm going to give you the floor, Mr. Burchell. It's yours.
Well, I don't want to question Susan's personal faith, because and
I understand that. I totally agree with you on that.
I would say that if she collapsed and there was a paramedic nearby, she was very, very lucky, because somebody else may have collapsed at the same time in another part of the city, and that paramedic wasn't there. She talked about the people like Moses and Jacob and David and so forth being sent and chosen by God, but at the same time they had free will. This is said a lot. There is nowhere, and I've looked very, very carefully, there is nowhere in the foundational text where it is suggested or said at all that we have free will. It really, and it shows over and over again that God not only is willing, but capable, but also very willing to intervene in men's hearts and force them to make certain choices for which he will then later punish them. He does this to David. He does this, of course, very famously to the pharaohs. So the notion that we have free will, well, I actually do believe that I am very largely free to do as I will. But the notion that this is given to us by God, well, it's not in the Old Testament given to us by that God. Now, when we look at, as Susan suggested, at creation, and then, I think she questioned the Big Bang and whatnot, it says, we have to believe in a creator. Every culture that has existed, as far as I understand, and I don't know all of them, but I know enough, they do believe in a creator, and they believe in a completely different creator. There's a creation myth or story that comes from every culture that you can imagine.
Yeah, the Indians, and we go back to the Aztecs. Sure, I understand that.
And the commonality is this. It is a group of people looking at the magnificence of the universe around them and saying, how did this happen?
Sun God, the rain God, and all that kind of stuff. Before I let you go, you spent a little time in Saudi Arabia. And these are the kind of, the Saudis, and this is just my opinion, I think they need us, but they don't like us, so they have to be friends. They like being king over there. If any democracy gets in, they're out of whack over there, and so that's why they lean and they're like smiling in our face, and all the time they want to, put a knife in our back. What do you think of the Saudis? You should spend some time living there.
Well, what I found about Saudi Arabia really it was just oppressively boring because it's as you know, it's a tyranny.
They like being king over there.
The family.
Yeah.
Well, sure. And they've got a very, very good working relationship with the Wahhabi clerics to control the population. But this is not substantially different than the Christian world was just a few hundred years ago.
But the Saudis, I mean, they claim to be our friends because they don't want to see what happened in Egypt and other places. They don't want to be kicked out of power.
Absolutely. No, and of course the United States claims to be their friends because they've got a lot of oil there. I think that friendship...
I think
oil didn't exist.
Yeah, I don't think we'd be buddies with them, and frankly, they don't have use for us. All right, how do you get your book, Mr. Burchell? You got 30 seconds.
Amazon.com, Barnes & Noble, or your local bookstore, and they can order it through Baker & Taylor.
Thanks for being honest. It's an interesting conversation, and
my pleasure.
And maybe we'll get a couple of smarter guys in than me, and we'll get you back on. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
All right, News Radio 680 WPTF, WPTF.com.
The following